Tania Bruguera, welcome to Hard Talk. Here we are in the Tate Modern Gallery. It is stuffed full of things, of paintings, of sculpture, and yet you as an artist seem much less concerned about things, much more focused on ideas. Would that be fair?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think the work I do as an artist is focused on gestures. I want to do political gestures, institutional gestures, human gestures. And I always feel that sometimes the most important things for you are invisible.
And in a sense, it strikes me that the tools of your art are people, both yourself, but also the viewers, the audience as well. Rather than paint or material, it's people that matter.
Mm-hmm. Well, the material of my work is social behavior. And it's how we communicate with each other in society, how we are together. And of course, that's only made by people.
You wrote not long ago, you said, art is an expression of myself. It's not something to be collected. Some might find that a little narcissistic.
Well, I didn't mean it's about me. I mean that art should be the place in which everybody can look at themselves. And when I say not to be collected, I mean that we have to pay attention on what is the role of art. Art is not only, or should not be primarily, something to invest in economically, but something to dive in emotionally, to open yourself up.
And so much of what you do, and we'll talk about specific pieces, installations and performances, so much of it seems to me in some ways closer to theatre than it is to any other art form. Is that because from your youth you have been preoccupied with performance?
Well, I am from a country where we have the best performer, the best political performers of our recent history, which is Fidel Castro.
Oh. You mean he's been an inspiration?
Well, it is a reference, let's say. But in a way, when you talk about politics, there is a lot of theater involved. And what I'm trying to do in my art is how can we break the classic theater where everything is being already decided a priori into a place where people can add something to the discourse.
So let's talk specifically about this installation you have at the Tate Modern Gallery. It's a big honor because some of the world's leading contemporary artists get the opportunity to fill that huge turbine hall. You've done something very interesting with it because actually you haven't put much in it at all.
And when you come to the Tate turbine, we get used to monumental and very spectacular
because it's the
work.
biggest of spaces.
Because people want to feel the space. When I enter, the first thing I saw after I knew I was going to do a commission is how beautiful the building is. And how the building is like a street, like an outside street. And I say, what I want is to intervene the building, not the space that I have been given. And how I wanted to intervene the building by bringing the neighbors in to decide what was missing in the institution for them. And then we decided all collectively to rename one of the two buildings after Natalie Bell, who is a local hero.
A community activist in this part of London.
Agnes 1. So that for me is something that happens all the time. The most important gesture, the most important work, many times is invisible.
And the theme that you were invited to work upon is movement and migration. And of course, you've got this extraordinary heat-sensitive flooring that you've put in. And I haven't seen it yet. I mean, I've seen the flooring, but I haven't seen what is supposed to happen, because if you get beyond a threshold of roughly 300 human bodies giving their heat to this floor...
And working together.
Working collectively, that's the point, I guess. If that happens, there's a big reveal. I haven't seen it because we haven't had 300 people on it yet, but what happens?
It just opened yesterday, so hopefully. But what we will see is the portrait of a young man who was suggested by Natalie Bell when we invited her to be nominated to change the name. And we asked her, give us an example of somebody you work with that represents the work you have done over 25 years. And she said, Yusuf. And we say, who's Yusuf? Say, well, Yusuf is this kid whose family collected the money for him to get out of Syria during the war. He came to the US, he was deported, he didn't get it. He arrived here without money, homeless, without speaking much English, with any connections. And by good luck, he got together with one of the organizations that work with youth at risk, in which Natalie actually was working. And after 5 years of working with him, putting his life back in track, now he's studying biomedicine.
Wow. So he's a Syrian refugee who's made a successful life in a new country, in the UK, in London.
And also it shows how much knowledge we can acquire and we can have in our countries when we let immigrants be part of our world.
And this ties in with other work you've done with this Immigrant Movement International that you've worked with a long time. You've done some extraordinary installations. One, I think, involved, here in London, involved people having to take a lie detector test to enter your exhibition. And the test was based on the immigration test that people face when they come into the UK. All of this seems to be a message that you're delivering about the positives of migration. But you must surely be aware that in many countries around the world, including in the UK, immigration has become the most sensitive of political subjects, with many people feeling that migration today threatens their identity, their culture, their economic well-being.
I think there is a lack of education around migration, and a lot of politicians use the fear of the other in order to get people around their own political issues. And I also feel that everybody has the right to move in the world.
Really?
Everybody should have the right to move around.
Despite potentially negative consequences on host communities?
But the thing is, we need to learn how to live together with people who are different from us.
You've taken it to extraordinary lengths over the years. For one of the most striking, in 2011, you chose to live in a very poor neighborhood in Queens, New York City, alongside a group of illegal immigrants who were eking out a living in New York. And you had the same income as them, you had the same lifestyle as them, and you lived, I think, for months like that. But wasn't that ultimately a stunt? Because you could opt out of that lifestyle at any point. I'm really struggling to see as an artist.
Absolutely.
What was the genuine, authentic merit of doing that?
Absolutely. I do understand where you come from, and of course, privilege means being able to leave a situation at any point that you decide. People who have no privilege, the people who can leave a place when they want, they are in the hands of others. So of course, as an artist, I have the privilege to move around worlds. But what I want to do with my art is for people to have empathy with others, to feel how other people feel, to understand where other people come from.
Do you think you persuade people? Do you think you change minds with your art?
That's what I would like. Then I don't know. That's not for me to say. That's something I would like art to do.
Let's go back a little bit, because here you are in one of London's most prestigious contemporary art museums, and yet in some ways your journey is quite unlikely, because you were raised in a communist system in Cuba where culture was very much part of the ideological whole. It was part of the system, and you were supposed to toe the line both artistically as well as politically. How did you become such an individualist in that system?
I don't think I'm an individualist. I think I'm a person who have a very clear goal with the work I'm doing, and understand that everybody has a right to have freedom of expression.
Which, in the system you were in, made you a rebel.
Yes, unfortunately, in Cuba, the government is more interested in being in power than empower the people they should be working for.
And yet, I can't help but note you came from a rather privileged family. I believe your father was a diplomat. He was inside the system.
Yes, he believed in the revolution, and I think what I could take from him is the idea of believing in your principles. I have different principles, but He has his, I had mine.
Did that lead to a fallout with your father as you began to push the boundaries of what was acceptable?
It did.
What did he say to you?
Well, it was a very intense relationship. The first time I was interrogated by the secret police was with my father bringing me into the interrogation. Yes.
Really? You mean he turned you in?
Yes, he turned me in.
What?
Yes, yes. 1993. 1994.
He took you to the secret police and said, here she is.
Yeah.
Do what you want with her.
Yeah.
That's extraordinary.
That's what happened in a country like Cuba, where everybody thinks that they have to save themselves. You know, and where if you go against the government, things are so dramatic that you have people sometimes turn against their family.
Do you forgive your father for that?
It was a very tough relationship after that. It was hard for me, it was painful, but at the end, he got in disgrace, like happens to a lot of people. He started seeing reality for what it was and not from his ivory tower. And I'm happy that before he died, he said that he was proud of me and that I was right. So I think that was the time we
It's interesting because obviously over the years you pushed the boundaries further and further. There's one series of works you've done which you've shown in Cuba and overseas called Chaplains Whisperer, in which you use different scenarios and different formats to invite people to think about censorship, about freedom of expression. And in one of your installations inside Havana, as part of the Chaplains Whisper series, you put a microphone on a stage, you had sort of pretend security force personnel on either side, and you invited Cubans to take the microphone and speak their minds, say what was on their minds. And of course, the authorities closed it down. They regarded you as a fundamental threat to the security of their system.
They don't even want people imagining they can be free. That's the problem we have in Cuba. They don't even want people rehearsing, feeling freedom. So what I do with my art is I take the propaganda the government has in Cuba or an institution has and put it to test. When I did that project, Raul Castro was just coming into power and he said he wanted everybody to speak their mind. But of course it was another theater where people knew who was talking in the meeting, what they were saying, it was all a script. And I say, well, if that's what you want, let's do it. And of course, what was revealed is now a lie.
But I can see that for you as an artist, it was important to do this, even if it threatened your security, your safety, your freedom. But by inviting other Cubans to take part in this sort of performative, artistic experiment, you were putting them in danger as well.
Well, it is true that there are consequences in Cuba when you step in and you speak your mind. In the case of that piece and other pieces, because in 2014 I also called for people to go to the Revolution Square to do the same piece, but in the public square.
Exactly.
And there were 86 people in jail, including myself, but also other people who I didn't know, actually.
How did you feel? Wasn't there an enormous feeling of guilt?
It is.
They're in prison because they decided to help you make your art.
Yeah. I think my art is a political statement, and I invite people to be together and think together how to create that political statement. Yes, I feel responsible more than anything. And I felt, and it's interesting because every time when I was in prison, I say, to the interrogator, I say, you have to liberate my audience. You have to liberate the audience of the work. I never told them those were dissidents or they were like, why? Because I always defended the fact that this was an art piece. Why? Because in Cuba, otherwise I would have been a life prison, because it's treason.
But I wonder, if we are being honest with each other, was that really a piece of art or was it a piece of activism? In the end, are you more of a political activist than you are an artist?
In my case, I see both as one thing. I cannot be like some people who are, let's say, artists during the day and in the weekend they go to a rally. For me, this is together. I mean, I'm from the revolution. I'm a daughter of the revolution, so politics is part of my everything. So I cannot separate having a stand on something that happens around me versus expressing through art or language how that is.
Yeah, but you see, you've developed this vocabulary, which is very interesting because it's sort of a unique way of looking at your creativity. You call it artivism, you call it socially useful art. But I'm wondering, where's the beauty? Where's the aesthetic sense? Where's the joy in your art? Or maybe for you that's not important.
It is important, of course it is important, because I have a sense of aesthetics, of course, in my work, but the sense of aesthetic, it doesn't come from looking at something. It comes at what you feel by being part of something. So when you discover you could speak for yourself, when you discover you can be better than you think you could be, when you discover that you're not afraid, that's beautiful.
Let me ask you about fear. Because when you've been picked up, and you've been arrested several times, how much fear do you feel?
What happens is when you know that something is unjust, and injustice is something you feel. It's not something mental, at least for me. It's something that you feel is happening to you. When you feel that the law doesn't exist, when you are in interrogation, you understand that the law doesn't exist. When you understand how a system works, yes, you are afraid, of course, but all of this understanding, all of this feeling that it's not fair, it's not just, is overpowering whatever fear you have.
Is it true that you once looked at one of your interrogators and said, "Thank you, what you are doing to me makes my art better"?
Yes, I did. And I also tell them, you don't know what you're doing, because I was a true believer of the revolution, and now I have doubts.
So despite what appears perhaps to the outside world to be a slow change in Cuba, your message seems to be quite bleak. I know right now you and a whole collective of artists inside the country are extremely concerned about what is called Decree 349.
Absolutely.
Which correct me if I'm wrong, but I understand by the end of 2018, all artists in Cuba, whatever their status, whatever their particular art form, are required to, in a sense, get a stamp of approval from the Ministry of Culture to allow them to continue to work.
Absolutely. And not only that, if you decide not to do it, then they will take away your permit to be an artist, like they have already done with some as a test, meaning you can never exhibit or buy art or sell your art or do anything related with art again in the country. They will take your equipment, your instrument, your house, your cars, whatever they think is helping you to do the art or you have used in the process of showing the art. And unfortunately, I think that creates problems where there are not, meaning there will be a huge space and a huge vacuum that can be filled with corruption. The people in Cuba, the interrogators and the Ministry of Culture already have sentenced me as a non-artist. Like in Cuba, once I enter a country, I'm not an artist. They decide that for you. That's the problem with 349. The government decide who is and who's not an artist, what is and what is not art.
But when they watch an interview like this, they hear you speak so frankly about what you see as the failure of their system and the deadening effect of their system on ideas, on expression, on creativity. How do you know that when you go back home, you won't be put back in a police cell?
Well, as it is, every time I come home since 2015, every time I enter the airport, I'm stopped. And I have to wait 1, 2, 3 hours until the secret police come and interrogate me when I go in and when I go out, sometime in between as well. But it's okay, I have nothing to hide. I'm not doing anything wrong. I only want people in Cuba to be free and to speak their mind. There's nothing wrong about that.